Thank you so much for coming out here for this. I'm so grateful to have an opportunity. We as a people, I don't think there is not one of us that feels helpless in having any input in our government. All of us feel completely helpless that we can have no effect. And we've had so many people that have even given up voting because they think that their vote doesn't matter, that it doesn't matter who gets elected. We just have more of the same rampant corruption that's going on in government. And we have to start acting as citizens, performing our civic duty yesterday. We have to start standing up and asserting our rights and take down corruption ourselves in this country. We have to start doing that. If we fail to step up now, our children are going to pay a far greater price. We're already paying a price now with what's going on in this country. Incredibly exorbitant taxation, oppression of rights, forcing us to put clothes on our face and inject chemicals into our body whether we want it or not. We have incredible problems. And if you think the suffering is bad right now of the people, it's going to get worse. If you go back and look, starting about the 1950s, 1960s, moving forward, it has steadily gotten worse and worse. And I'm going to talk more about this, but what's going on is all the legislation that's going through our state governments as well as the federal government. And let me tell you, the legislation that goes through the General Assembly affects us far more closely than what the federal government is doing. So what my work is about is to teach you how to take back power that is inherent to the people, to educate you on what your constitutional rights are, to set an example for you to follow, to lead the way and show you how to get this done yourselves. And the first step of that is we have to know what are our rights. How many people in here know that we have a state constitution? So this is probably the first group that I've ever spoken in front of where every single person knows that we have a state constitution. Congratulations to you. But when I go out, typically I see about half the hands go up. Half the people don't even know that we have a state constitution. It is not taught in our schools at any level. Not in grade school, not in high school, not in junior college, not in law school, grad school. The Tennessee Constitution is not taught. And that is a failure of our education system. It is an oppression of your knowledge. And it's why everything has gone wrong. Article 1, Section 1, power is inherent in the people. And we have an unalienable, indefeasible right to reform, alter, or abolish government in such manner as we may think proper. It is a constitutional right to reform government. How do we do that? We all want reform, whether it's term limits, election integrity. We all want reform. How do we do it? We don't know, do we? I'm going to teach you. Article 1, Section 31. And Section 31 of the Tennessee Constitution, it's more than half a page, single-spaced, and it's going through the boundaries of the state. But there's a very important part in Section 31. It says the people have the right of soil and the right to exercise sovereignty. You have the right of sovereignty. The right to exercise sovereignty, that's the power to make law yourselves. So when we say unalienable, a lot of people mispronounce that. They say unalienable. It's actually unalienable. And it means that a lien can't be placed on it. You can't sell it, you can't transfer it. And this is very important because when they say, oh, this representative democracy, we're not a democracy. But what they're talking about is the transfer of power from the people to the elected. And our power is unalienable to reform that government. We don't transfer that power to them. That power remains in us. I'm just reading the Constitution. I'm telling you what your rights are. So Section Article 1, Section 1, powers inherent in people. We have unalienable right to reform government. Section 31, we have the right to exercise sovereignty. Now here's where it gets good. Article 1, Section 23. And it says that the people have a right to assemble peacefully for their common good. That's what we're doing here today. The right of assembly is not out protesting in the streets. That's not what the right of assembly is about. The right of assembly is to come together as a people, talk about our problems, and talk about solutions to the problems. Presenting a problem without a solution is futile. So we have to come together and come up with solutions. So in section Article 1, Section 23, we have that right to assemble, and we have a right to instruct our representatives. Constitutional right to instruct our representatives. What does that mean? We haven't been told, have we? Well, I read the discussion that they had in the first Congress. First Congress, I read the transcript. And they were talking about putting this right into the Federal Bill of Rights, that we have a right to instruct our congressmen. They decided not to because they thought it would lead to factionalism, civil war. So they decided not to do that. What Representative Jerry, Elbridge Jerry, he was out of South Carolina, and he's talking about this right to instruct. And he said, "Do gentlemen not conceive that the instructions may be so general as to come from all the people? If they do, it is the sovereign will. For gentlemen will not contend that sovereignty vests in the legislature. The friends and patrons of this Constitution have always held that sovereignty resides in the people and that they do not part with it on any occasion. And to say sovereignty vests in the people and they have not a right to instruct is absurd to the last degree." Absurd to the last degree. So from that, now we know what they're talking about, sovereignty. There's no such thing as like sovereign citizen unless you're talking about a state official. Because the state officials, they cloak themselves in sovereign immunity of the state. That's false. What sovereignty is the people as a whole. If we all want something, if we all want the same thing, it is the sovereign will. So in Section 23, we have a right to instruct our representatives and to apply to those invested with the powers of government for redress of grievance or other proper purposes by address or remonstrance. So let's break that down. Instruct our representatives, we're going to tell them what we want them to do. Apply to those invested with the powers of government. Who's invested with the powers of government? Governor Lee, the House, the Senate, the General Assembly combined. Those are powers of the government. Judges are powers of the government. Our county commissions, mayors. Our founders were, the framers of our Constitution, they were very broad in our Constitution. For example, North Carolina, and we were part of North Carolina. And actually Section 31 goes back in Article 1, Section 31, when we have the right to exercise sovereignty. It says giving respect to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of North Carolina. The North Carolina Constitution says you have a right to petition for redress to the General Assembly. So that right in the North Carolina Constitution is only to go to your senators and representatives. In Tennessee, the framers of our Constitution made it more broad. They said those invested with the powers of government. Thomas Jefferson said that the Tennessee Constitution is the least imperfect and the most Republican. And this is one of the reasons, is because it's more broad who we can go to. And in most of the constitutions, it says for redress of grievances. Our Constitution says proper purposes. For redress of grievance or other proper purposes. And then it says by address or remonstrance. By address, oral address. Like the Gettysburg Address, inaugural address. It's an oral presentation. You have a constitutional right to stand in front of your government and say, we've had enough. Every one of you has a constitutional right to do that. And I'm not making this up. It's in the Constitution. I have a copy here. You're welcome to read it. You can download it from my website and get it Tennessee Code annotated. It's right there. I'm the first person since 1850 to exercise this right. It's been 170 years since somebody has done this. And my remonstrance was announced on the floor of the Tennessee House and the Tennessee Senate as a single citizen, John Gentry, standing up, defending the rights of the people, and standing up against corruption in our courts. One man. When that was read, 39 seconds on the House floor, and it was Representative Halsey that presented it, and he said, members of the I'm approaching the Tennessee House on behalf of Mr. John Gentry, involving a petitions of grievances. And it was 1, unconstitutional and void statutes. 2, failure to address grievances. 3, judicial reform. 4, reinstitution of constitutionally guaranteed rights, signed Bud Halsey, Tennessee State Representative. That was on the floor of the House. I am not making this up. This is a constitutional right that you have. It's actually a God-given right. You have a right to pray to God, right? Yes. We have a right to go to them, just as we have a God-given right to send our prayers up to God. This is a right not even denied the creature in addressing the deity. And our government has oppressed this knowledge so much, it's been wiped from our collective knowledge. This right exists in the federal Constitution. It's Article 1, or it's the First Amendment. We have a right to petition for redress of grievances. And if you ask anybody, what is this right? How do you exercise it? Not a person knows. Not a person in this country can tell you and give you a good answer what that right means. So how this works is, if you have a grievance, a personal grievance, which is oppression, a grievance is oppression of a right or discrimination. That's what a grievance is. So if you have an individual personal grievance, you can go to those invested with the powers of the government. Whoever has the power to redress you for the wrong done unto you. As a people, now, we can come together and we can all co-sign a remonstrance and present it to our General Assembly and say, here is the sovereign will. This is the sovereign will of the people. And so what I'm going to do, elected, is I'm going to teach you how to exercise this right and take back control of your government, have a voice directly in government, and I mean this in the very literal sense, a direct voice in government. So how I'm going to demonstrate this for the people, I guarantee term limits. I guarantee term limits will happen for every state judge, senator, and representative. I guarantee it. And here's how I'm going to get it done. I'm going to harness the will of the people and unite them in this common purpose. In the United States Senate, they did a study on term limits. And poll after poll has shown 82% on average want term limits. Doesn't matter your race, doesn't matter your political affiliation, doesn't matter however you self-identify. 82% of the people in this country want term limits. Now, when I explain to the people the corruption that is going on in our legislative houses, and when I explain why we need term limits, I think I'm going to get 95%. I think 95% of Tennesseans are going to co-sign with me. Now, This right is still being oppressed because I asserted this right a second time. The first time it was just John Gentry by himself. The second time I went around the state, I got signatures from people across the state of Tennessee. And I presented that to my district representative, Johnny Garrett, and I said, you're going to go file this with the clerk of the House. I'm not asking you. You're going to go do this. If you don't do it, I'm going to take you to court, and I'm going to have a judge order you to do it because it's your duty. And you have to perform your duty. So I'm not asking you here. He pulled me in for an hour. This was like a 1 hour long hostile witness deposition. He grilled me on my knowledge of the Constitution. He's an attorney, too. He grilled me for like an hour in there. And when we finished, he walked down to the clerk's office and he filed it. You have to know your rights. You have to know where they come from. So in that remonstrance, I'm asking them to resolve to welcome, hear, and decide petitions. I want our representatives to welcome petitions from the people. And I want them to hear and decide them. Vote yes, vote no, up to your conscience. But I don't want these ignored anymore. And Speaker Sexton is oppressing. I have a constitutional right to address those invested with the powers of government. And going back to our coming from North Carolina, that the right to petition the General Assembly, I have a clear right to address them. So I'm suing Speaker Sexton. Just last week, I filed a brief in the Tennessee Court of Appeals on why the court should order Speaker Sexton to put me in front of the Tennessee House to ask them very nicely to resolve to welcome, hear, and decide petitions. In addition to that, I'm asking them to reinstate the Propositions and Grievances Committee. In the 1800s, they had a Propositions and Grievances Committee. This was a Republican form of government back then. It's not today. It's an oligarchy of entrenched, corrupt political elites. But back then, it was a Republican form of government where the people had a voice in government, and they had a Propositions and Grievances Committee. Imagine that. So that's all I'm asking is to restore that. Now let's go back to how am I going to get term limits done? So right now, government is oppressing us. I have no faith in our corrupt courts that they're going to uphold my right to address the Tennessee House. I'm going to argue as strong as I can. I'm going to back them up against the wall in the Court of Appeals and in the Tennessee Supreme Court. I have no faith in our corrupt courts. So that I'm running for office. Now here's how I'm going to get it done. As governor, in the Tennessee Constitution, the governor has the power to convene the General Assembly. Y'all get down here. We got some business to take care of. All you senators, representatives, we got some business that's got to get done. If this is extraordinary times, and it needs your attention right now, we're not waiting until next session. We're going to do it. We're going to do it right now. The governor has the power to do that. Before I do that, I'm going to go out on social media. I'm going to do press releases. And I am going to make the people aware of this right. And I'm going to ask them to co-sign with me. And I'm going to get, probably close to 6 million signatures, I think, which is most all of Tennessee. Something a little less with everybody over 18. But I think I'm going to get most everybody in Tennessee is going to sign this. And I'm going to present that to the speakers of both houses and say, the people are asserting they're exercising the right of sovereignty here. We're not asking you to sponsor a bill. No, we're asserting our right to instruct you. And it is the sovereign will that we have immediate term limits. Statutorily, today, here's the legislation. I wrote it for you. Vote yes, because you swore an oath. You senators and representatives swore an oath to support the Constitution of this state. And the Constitution says that the people have the right to exercise sovereignty, and they have an unalienable, indefeasible right to reform government. So we're going to reform you. And we're exercising our right of sovereignty, and we are presenting you with our instructions as sovereign will of the people. And if you don't do this, then you're in violation of your oath to support the Constitution of this state, and I will be following up with proposed articles of impeachment forthcoming. I guarantee it's going to happen. Now, like Governor Lee, he did 10 for 10 when he was campaigning, right? He had one of his 10 term limits. Anybody heard anything from him? I haven't heard a thing. I don't think he has said one thing about term limits. I'm going to put it right up front and in their faces and shove it down their throats. We're not going to ask them. We're going to get it done ourselves. Now, even if Governor Lee had advocated for it, what's he going to do? Get one or two guys to sponsor a bill, and it's going to get shut down in committee and not even make it to the House floor. When I do this, I'm going to put it on the House floor, and I'm going to move one of my friends down there in the House and the Senate to do a roll call vote, because I want to know exactly who voted no. Yeah. And I want the people to know who voted no. Yeah. So I make sure that my proposed articles of impeachment reflect properly who's acting in violation of their oath to support the Constitution of this state. This is how we do everything. Mask mandates, closing our churches, shutting down our businesses. We remonstrate as a people and say, no, the people do not want this, and we're not going to accept it. This is how we put our voice back in government. Same thing with election integrity. There are some things, not a lot, but there are some things that are common to all of us that we all want. We all want corruption to stop in government, don't we? Yeah. Anybody like the thought of having corrupt judges out there? I don't. Does anybody like the thought of corrupt legislation going through our General Assembly? I don't. So there's another thing that we can unite behind is stopping this corruption. And let's talk about two aspects of this corruption. And there is nobody in this entire country that has the knowledge, the courage, or the integrity to stand up to this corruption the way that I do. Not a single person. Even Trump said, I can't talk bad about judges. Why not? Why not? Can't you talk bad about judges? I talk bad about judges all the time. They're corrupt. They're despicable. They extort, they financially and emotionally devastate families. Yes, they do. And it's got to stop. And this is the root of corruption that's going on. So there's nobody that stands up to the judiciary the way I do. I know all their little stupid made-up rules. I've taken 3 cases to the Supreme Court of the United States. I know the federal court system. I know the state court system as well as any of their attorneys. I basically fighting these corrupt attorneys. I apprenticed under them for like 6 years. And I got the best legal education that money cannot buy in law school doing this. So I know how to fight them. And I'm not an attorney that they can take my license away. They have no leverage on me, is why I can fight them. So here's why we have a problem with corruption in the judiciary. In 1971, in the incompetence of our General Assembly, they created the Tennessee Board of Judicial Conduct, and they staffed it with judges. There's about 14 judges overseeing judges across the state. Now, here's the problem with that. First, you got the fox watching the hen house, right? Okay. Now, here's 2 real problems. Article 6, Section 7 of the Tennessee Constitution says no judge shall hold any other office of trust or profit under this state or the United States. You're a judge, that's all you get to be. Why do you think the framers did that? That's actually in a lot of state constitutions. It's in the federal Constitution. It's called the Incompatibility Clause. You're incompatible with any other office. And what they said is the mere offering of an office is a bribe. And the Whigs were constantly, so Whigs and Tories, right? Whigs wanted independence. The Tories were loyalists to the British, right? So the Whigs were constantly complaining about plural office holding. It's always corrupt. And so having the wisdom of hindsight, having suffered the tyranny and corruption themselves, they said no judge can hold any other office here. But these idiots, incompetent fools in our General Assembly decided to put judges in second offices of trust to oversee themselves. In the preamble of the Tennessee Constitution, it said, "We the delegates do hereby establish this form of government." That's what this Constitution is. This is our form of government. Yeah, we have executive branch, legislative branch with two houses, and a judicial branch. But this form of government also prohibits judges from holding second offices. That's our form of government. And it's been unlawfully altered by a corrupt government for corrupt purpose, to deny justice in our courts. In our Declaration of Independence, it was agreed for altering fundamentally our form of government. This is a declared act of tyranny. Do y'all not get it? I don't understand. I've said this 100 times. And why do we continue to accept it? Why do we say nothing? If you keep silent, you're going to continue to have corruption. And I'm showing you how to stand up, and I'm begging you to stand with me. I've been fighting this a long time on my own, and I'm quite tired. But I'm going to continue the fight until the day I die, because I swore an oath. And I hold that oath dear. And my son back there, I don't want it worse for him. So I'm fighting. And I implore the people of Tennessee to fight with me. The other problem with these prohibited offices, Article 5, Section 1, the House has the sole power of impeachment. Who can be impeached? Judges, attorneys for the state, legislators, governors. It lists who can be impeached. Judges. Article 6, Section 7, judges may be removed by concurrent vote of both houses. Judicial oversight is legislative power. The legislature has the power by concurrent vote of both houses to remove a judge. Or they have the power in Article 5 to impeach them. That's legislative power. So when they created the Board of Judicial Conduct, they surrendered legislative power to the judiciary, and the judiciary usurped that power for themselves. And we lost the check of one branch over the other. The check and balance of power destroyed. And today our judiciary and our legislature act as one branch. And that's why we have tyranny. It's why we have corruption. Because the fox is watching the henhouse. The legislature, those cowards and fools, surrendered their power. And they won't take it back. I've brought this to their attention many times. So what I'm going to do, I've asked them very nicely. I stood in committee and I said, if you don't understand the provisions of the Constitution you sort of uphold, you're not fit for office. A high school student can understand what is an office of trust. And your continued feigned ignorance is treason to the Constitution. I stood in front of them. Those are my exact words to 9 senators and 16 representatives, and they won't fix it. So if I'm elected as governor, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ask them nicely one more time. The day I'm elected, I'm going to ask them. The day I take office, I'm going to ask them very nicely. Speaker Sexton, Speaker McNally, y'all need to fix this. And you need to start hearing petitions for redress against corrupt judges. They need to be heard in the houses. That's why we have a right to address our legislative houses, because it exposes the corruption. It is the single check and balance of power of the people over government. That's what that right is. It is the ultimate check and balance of power. The right of the people to petition for redress of grievance and to do it in our Constitution by oral address to the legislative houses, it is the ultimate check and balance of power. And it is the oppression of that right that is at the root of everything that's gone wrong. So what I'm going to do, after I ask them nicely, they still refuse me, I'm going to lock the doors to the Capitol. I am not kidding. I will get troopers out there. I will get the Tennessee Guard to stand guard in front of the floors of the houses. I'm going to lock the doors and say, you guys are not going to legislate. You are not going to conduct business until you restore the form of government established in this Constitution. Because it hasn't changed. I will lock the doors. If I have to, the governor has the power to convene or to assemble the militia in case of insurrection. That's insurrection. When they unlawfully alter our form of government. If I have to, I'll assemble a militia. I don't think it'll have to go that far. I don't think it will. But I'll do whatever I have to defend this Constitution against these traitors down there. And we all have to. All of us together have to express outrage. Not just wait on John Gentry to get it done. I'll do the best that I can. But I am impotent without all of you next to me. I really am. The only reason that I have any voice in government is because there's, I don't know, a couple 100,000 people that follow my work in Tennessee right now. That's the only reason that they listen to me at all down there. One of the other problems and evidence of corruption that's going on, so we have corruption in the courts because they transferred check and balance of power. Now, we've got incredible corruption going down the General Assembly, and here's the proof. By the mere fact that they propose 1,500 bills every session, every single year, 1,500 new pieces of legislation proposed, and they passed close to 1,000 every single year. That's why Tennessee Code annotated you can stack it to the ceiling in here. That's our law. You can stack it to the ceiling in here. There's so much law. All of it is little tweaking. Somebody wanting a little more money, somebody wanting a little more power, a way to make more money. All of that legislation, 90% of it, none of that legislation is for the benefit of the people. It's for the benefit of special interest and to protect corruption. So just the fact of that much legislation down there is proof of the corruption. Now, I can go through specific bills. I'm not going to kill you with it. But there's lots of examples of bills where it's very easy to identify the corruption that's going on and show why that legislation is corrupt. So we've got this problem with a corrupt judiciary with no check and balance of power over them. And we have all of this corrupt legislation. And the reason we have the corrupt legislation is because you can't challenge it in front of a court because you got a corrupt judge. So you see how it all breaks down? It all broke down because we lost the right of remonstrance and because they transferred power to the judiciary. That's the breakdown. Once we fix those two things, it's going to fix everything. Now, about this legislation, I can fix it short term. While I'm in office, the governor can state in writing to the General Assembly why he won't sign, and they're going to have to vote on it again. I'm going to wear them out. I will go through, I will work, they're doing this 1,000 bills January to May. No, they usually end early May. They send the session down there. So I'm going to be working like a dog, reading out, what are they trying to do here? What are they trying to do here? It takes me about half hour to an hour to analyze the bill and identify the corruption in it. So I've got about 1,000 hours of work ahead of me, coming out the gate right there, to shut down their legislation, but I will. If I have to not sleep, work on weekends, I will get it done. I've worked that hard before in my life, and for such a noble purpose, I'm happy to do it again. Now, I'm going to send about 800 of these things probably back to them. That's going to lock them down, because they're going to have to come back in and override my veto. So I'm just going to be, if nothing else, I'm going to be a thorn in their side, throw a wrench in the works. But what I'm also going to do is each one of these, on the especially important ones, is I'm going to do a press conference. And I'm going to do a video on social media, and I'm going to say, here's why HB ABCD is unlawful, repugnant to the Constitution, or is corrupt. And I would like your help to call your representative and your senator and tell them, do not ride Governor Gentry's veto. We don't want it. And I think that I will shut down the corrupt legislation with the people beside me. And I believe that when I explain this, I always explain things very clearly. Why? I evidence it out for you, so you know what I'm talking about. I break it down, even their corrupt, tricky attorney language. I break it down into layman terms for you, so you can understand it. And I think we'll stop most of that legislation. So what I'm talking about here is restoring the republic. And you will never hear any politician, and I'm not a politician, by the way, but you won't hear a politician who is a politician. They're not going to say anything about, we got a problem with corrupt legislation, are they? No. Nobody's going to say we have a corrupt judiciary. No. Even Trump backed down. I stand up. I'm not afraid of them. I know how to fight. I was a Force Recon Marine for 8 years. Does anybody know what that is? It's like a Navy SEAL, but we're better. No, I have a lot of good friends that are SEALs. So, but I used to jump out of airplanes, 25,000 feet. I used to lock out of fast attack nuclear submarines. I've been on every climate in this planet, from jungle to north of the Arctic Circle to deserts in the Middle East. I've served everywhere, and probably the toughest fight I've ever had is this fight I'm in right now. I have never done anything more difficult in my entire life than the work that I'm doing now. Wow. It is arduous, and it eats at me. People go to government about corruption and they just get ignored. So they come to me asking for help, and it breaks my heart. I hear stories every week. Somebody comes to me and says, I'm suffering this corruption, what can I do? They're going to take my kids. They're going to lock me up. They're putting waste into our community, whatever it is. I hear it, from people across the street because government won't listen to them. So that's what my work is about, is taking stand against this corruption that's going on in government. And I'm going to be doing some really good things like term limits. I'm going to be doing some really good things like shutting down this corrupt legislation that's going through there. I'm going to have a petition and remonstrance day. Once a month, any citizen can come down to the Capitol and they can present their grievance, petitioning for redress, or they can give me a proper purpose. Hey, we want to do We want to do turbines on the Mississippi River and gather electricity. Oh, okay, well, let's look at it. Whatever proper purpose you have, improving infrastructure, election integrity, whatever proper purpose, bring it to me. Or bring a grievance. If I can grant the redress for a grievance, I will. If I can't, and I look into the matter, and it is a legitimate grievance, I'll sign it and go take it over to the House and send it myself and let them decide it. Or I'll direct you to the correct agency and I'll sign it and say, y'all need to fix this guy. That's what I'll do for the people. Now, when we do this here in Tennessee, what do you think is going to happen over in Arkansas, Georgia? How come Governor Gentry is hearing petitions? Why don't you do that?
Yes, yes.
It's going to set an example, isn't it?
Yes.
And the other governors are going to have to follow. When we get term limits, what do you think the other states are going to do?
Whoa.
When we show them that the volunteer state is leading the way in taking back control of our state government, the other states are going to follow us.
Yes, they will.
Tennessee will lead the way. And the reason, I've said this, Tennessee is ground zero for restoring the republic. We are where it is going to happen, right here in this state in our lifetime.
I believe that.
And I believe in the next decade we're going to get this done. Whether I win this election or not, because I'm going to keep running. And eventually everybody in this state is going to know who John Gentry is, and they're going to wonder why the right of remonstrance is oppressed. We're going to put this back, and when we get it done here, the other states are going to follow. Now, when we get term limits here in Tennessee, and then we get term limits in several states, what are we going to do to Congress?
Oh, yeah.
Because now the states will know how to assert their rights.
Yes.
And we will come together as a people, and we'll be done with Biden's, Schumer's, Pelosi's, all of them. We'll get them out of there, and we'll restrict them to terms. Just as an aside on term limits, I'm also going to have a high hurdle provision. If there's a really good senator or a really good representative, I'm going to set a really high hurdle for him to jump over, or her. And say, if you can get over this hurdle, I don't know exactly what it is, I'm thinking that if you can get a nominating petition with 2/3 of the voter signatures of everybody that voted in your district's election, I don't care if they're Democrat or Republican. If you can get 2/3 of them, you can run a third, fourth, fifth time. I don't care.
That's awesome.
You know, so we'll have a high hurdle mechanism to keep the good ones. I'll tell you what, I ain't seen many good ones.
Right.
I've met with over 70 legislators one-on-one. There's only I list them on one hand, less than one hand. It's that bad. They all act for a corrupt purpose down there. And if we don't start stepping up, the children are going to pay a price. Your grandchildren
That's right.
are going to pay the price. Now, my little guy, he's going to know how to fight like a Force Recon Marine. And he's also going to know how to fight like an attorney and a legislator. He's going to know, I hope that we teach our children too, you know, how to fight for themselves.
Yes.
How to teach them how to maintain that control over government by teaching them what's in this Tennessee Constitution.
Yes.
It was George Washington. What could be equally important than teaching the science of government to the future guardians of liberty? Stated that to the Congress. According to Washington, it's more important than math. That they know the science of government. And that's what I'm talking about. Science of government. It's not complicated like rocket science. I mean, this Constitution is written in layman's terms. It's not hard to understand. There's a couple new sections that were added over the years. But Tennessee Constitution is relatively pristine. I mean, there hasn't been a lot of amendments. California, 57 amendments to their Constitution. They've changed their Constitution so many times, it's no longer a Republican form of government. And the federal Constitution, Article 4, Section 4, the United States shall guarantee every state a Republican form of government. And I said, well, You know, when they're proposing that language, it was Edmund Randolph, an attorney from Pennsylvania, and he said no state ought to be able to transform itself into a monarchy. We don't want a king. We went through that, right? So that's what he's saying. You can't, we're going to guarantee, the United States, this federal government is going to guarantee a Republican form of government to every state. So whether a government is Republican in character or form is determined by its state constitution. And that's actually a Supreme Court opinion, the United States Supreme Court Cruikshank case. It's in 1800s. It said whether a government is Republican in character or form is reflected in its constitution. And fundamental to a government Republican in character is the right of the people to petition a government. That's a fundamental aspect of our form of government, is that we have the right to petition government. And the other part of it is rule of law. So when Edmund Randolph said no state shall transform itself into a monarchy, so by default not into an oligarchy. Monarchy is rule of one, oligarchy is rule of a few, democracy is rule of the many. Who's the ruler? Who's the ruler? The law. We rule ourselves by making the law. That Constitution is ratified by us. That Constitution is the supreme law. We're not ruled by men. Get that through your heads. We're ruled by law. We're the sovereign. The people have the right to exercise sovereignty. We heard it from Representative Gentry in the first Congress. Gentlemen will not contend that sovereignty presides in the legislature. It vests in the people. So that's what a Republican form of government is. In short, in Abraham Lincoln's words, a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. That's what a Republican form of government is. And ours, Tennessee government, is not that. It is not that. It's an oligarchy of corruption that's going on down there. One last thing, and then I'll open this up. How many of you know there's going to be 4 amendments, proposed amendments to the Tennessee Constitution? I see one hand. 2 hands. So 2 people in here know that there are going to be 4 amendments to the Tennessee Constitution. On the ballot in November, you're going to have a chance to vote for them. Here's the problem. Article 11, Section 3 states how the Constitution is to be amended. And the reason ours has been amended so few times is because these guys were really smart and they made it very hard to amend this Constitution. It's extremely difficult. Here's the process. It's presented or sponsored as an amendment in the House and the Senate, and that's a legislative session. So every 2 years you elect representatives, right? That 2-year period, well, they have 2 sessions, but that's their session that they have, that 2-year period. Then it has to go back to a second General Assembly with new House members. And they have to, so it's got to go through 2 elections before it go on the ballot, excuse me. And before the second House of Representatives is elected, it has to be published to the people 6 months prior. So this gives the people an opportunity to vet their representative. Are you for it or against it? Because that's my single issue, whether I'm going to vote for you or not. Are you for or against the amendment? It gives you a chance to vet your representatives. So, and then from there, once it goes through the first bunch of House of Representatives, then published 6 months before the next group, and then those guys pass it again. Then it goes on the ballot in a gubernatorial election, decided by a majority of the people, before it gets amended to the Constitution. Now, we had 2 people that knew about this, right? The definition of published is to make known to the people in general. Black's Law Dictionary, to make known to the people in general. Do we think that the people in general know? No. They do not. And so these amendments, in my strong opinion, are void coming out of the gate because they haven't been presented in the proper way. So they're wrong coming out of the gate. Now, there's one I'll start with that is okay, in my opinion. The Tennessee Constitution presently prohibits ministers from serving in the General Assembly. I think they could use a little God down there, you know. So I think ministers in the General Assembly, and Madison and Jefferson spoke on this because there was a lot of state constitutions that included that. Not a lot, but some. And they said, you know, a person's profession should not preclude them from running for office, you know, from having a right to run for office. If they chose, you know, the profession of being a minister of God, that shouldn't preclude them. And so in 1978, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that unconstitutional in our Tennessee Constitution. So in the Fourth Congress, they approved this Constitution that said ministers can't have it. That was, you know, in the Fourth Congress, but our corrupt Supreme Court said, well, that's unconstitutional. I don't disagree with the opinion of the Supreme Court. I'm just saying the Supreme Court's corrupt. But they said it's unconstitutional, and they're the ones that presently get to have their say, these Supreme Court justices. But I'm okay with that one. That one's all right. The other three, whew. First one, I'm going to give you the worst one. Prohibit slavery. Well, you think, well, why would we not want to prohibit slavery, right? It's already prohibited. In Article 1, Section 33, slavery and involuntary servitude are forever prohibited, except as punishment for a crime of which a person has been duly convicted. That's our Constitution right now. Here's what they're changing it to. Slavery and involuntary servitude are prohibited. Nothing shall prevent an inmate from working. So now just with that, that's tricky attorney language, is it not? Like, what is that? Well, why? Why do they want to change the Constitution like that? Nothing's going to prevent an inmate from working. There's two reasons. Our prison system is run by CoreCivic, a private prison contractor.
Hello?
Maybe they got some free labor coming their way after this amendment.
Hello?
Dump up profits. I think probably more likely is inmates will be given jobs, and then their wages will be garnished to perhaps reimburse the state for their incarceration, or most definitely, a lot of prisoners have children, and so pay child support to the state is what it's about. Which is another form of slavery, is it not? You're going to have them work in there, and then you're going to take their money. So it's a sham. It is an absolute scam that they're running. And this thing was proposed by like 13 Democrats and 1 Republican, but it passed a Republican trifecta government. It's a scam. The other one is right to work. Now, Leah's putting this out as, protection for workers. You know, this is going to protect them. But it's tricky attorney language. What it says is that an employer cannot deny employment. In part, this is what it says. I'm not reading the whole thing. But it says an employer cannot deny employment due to membership in a union. If you're, as a reason. Now, Tennessee is an at-will employment state. Employer doesn't have to have a reason to fire you. He can just fire you. And you can quit if you're an employee. You can quit anytime you want. That's what at-will employment means. Well, now they're saying, so if you get a union that gets strong and the employer says, well, I've had enough of this, I'm just getting rid of all the union employees. He can't. He's constitutionally prohibited. Now, here's the real problem. What does this Constitution do? What is it? Anybody? Huh? No, it's not a contract. This is our form of government that we created. And the rights that are stated in here, Article 1, Declaration of Rights, they protect us against government. So the only purpose of this document is to create our form of government and protect the people against that government, right? That's the only purpose of this document. What does this right to work do? It protects employees against employers, supposedly, right? It has no place in the Constitution. It has absolutely no place in the Constitution. And in my strong opinion, it's pro-union. And unions are not good.
That's right.
Now, the idea of unions is good, but I was actually just watching Jimmy Hoffa movie last night. And, you know, that was rife with corruption. Teamsters Union, rife with corruption in there. Today, most unions are ran by attorneys. And they go in and they lobby the legislature to improve conditions for workers, supposedly, right? But what they do is they create lawsuits for themselves to sue businesses on behalf of workers. Now, how these work is a class action lawsuit. The worker's going to get scraps, $1,000. But an employer that's got 5,000 employees giving out $1,000 a piece, and the attorney's going to keep 30% of that, right? If he wins the class action lawsuit, they're making millions. The attorneys make millions off of these workers. They're exploiting them worse than the employers are.
Yep.
They really are. They're exploiting them worse than the companies are because they're throwing scraps, a little better wage, a little better benefits, you know, maybe better working conditions. Scraps. The attorneys are making millions of dollars. I'm talking like tens of millions of dollars that they're making, basically exploiting workers. Unions are not good because it's going to result in bad legislation in this state. And it's going to cost everybody across the board with increased prices in everything because the businesses are going to have to cover their costs. So it's not good in my opinion. The other one is disability of the governor. This is like straight Palooza garbage out of D.C. So what this amendment is about is if a majority of the cabinet, now the cabinet in Tennessee is those 22 departments, Department of Education, Department of Children's Services, there's 22 of those. The heads of those departments are the cabinet. And then there's 6 close cabinet members. So there's like 28. 28 people can say, you know, we don't think John Gentry's fit to serve as governor anymore. He's a little crazy. And they can remove the governor. And they don't, and then it doesn't say anything like he's got to be diagnosed or the language is extremely loose. And so what it allows for is a coup by the cabinet against the will of the people to remove a governor. That's the danger that's in this thing. And that one, so all of them vote no on the basis that they're not published to the people. Tell them to go back and do it right. But if you're going to vote on any of them, the one allowing ministers is the only one that is valid in my opinion. So, does anybody have any? I'm going to wrap this up because I'll sit up here. I got lots to talk about with the corruption that's going on. And I can go on and on and on. Does anybody have any questions?